Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says, A man's parliament striving for an inclusive India. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. There are two important issues the article is pointing at. One is the representation of the women in the parliament. The second is about the linguistic gender asymmetries in the laws of the country. What do we understand by representation of women in the parliament as well as the state assemblies? When we look into the India's independence movement, what did we have? We have all sections of the people who contributed for the India's independence. If we consider the gender, we have the men and the women who contributed for India's success. We also have different types of religion who also contributed for India's success, and we had all strata of society from different castes, different economic classes, all contributing to the India's success when it comes to the India's independence movement. But when we consider gender, what we have is the men and the women. But when it comes to the representative in the parliament as well as in the state legislative assembly, it is the men who are represented more in the parliament as well as the state legislative assembly is what is the first major concern. So if you consider the statistics, it clearly points out that the tilt is in favor of the men and not towards the females. If we have to consider the statistics in 1952, when the Indian Republic held its first parliamentary session, 39 strong, intelligent, and passionate women leaders sat in the hallowed halls of power, challenging a centuries old tide of men's dominance over the polity. So, this basically means that immediately after the constitution came into place, and then these people represented us in the parliament, what we had were women who were represented in the Lok Sabha, but eventually over a period of time, ideally, it should have been equal to the men, but then the parliament has become the bastion of the men is the first major concern. How is it in the other countries? India was able to give universal adult franchise to the women in the early scenario, and you also had many other so-called developed countries which provided universal suffrage to women only after certain period of time. So if we consider the statistics with respect to other countries, at a time when women formed only 1.7% of the total members of the United States Congress and 1.1% of the Parliament of the United Kingdom, India was leading the way in the fight towards more inclusive world with democracies with 5.5% women representation. So if you consider the so-called developed countries and the developing country like India, we were much advanced in creating this gender parity. So it is not just about speaking about equality on the global platforms, but when it comes to the actual implementation, we were able to implement it far in advance than some of the developed countries. So the first advantage for India is it is much better than the developed countries, but if you consider it numerically, we do not have much of the women representation is the first major concern with respect to the representation in the parliament. So the concern is that we should have more women members who should be representing in the Indian parliament, and that is when the laws are made by the country, in case there are any laws which is inspecific to the women's viewpoints can be taken up and a law can be drafted, or else it will be men who will be drafting these laws for the women where the women's voices will not be heard is the first issue. When we look into the second issue, what is it speaking about? It is speaking about what is called as the linguistic gender asymmetries in the lawmaking. What do we understand by this? Whenever we are addressing a person, we have to address that particular person on the basis of gender. If it is a person holding one of the designated positions, we usually call that particular post as a chairman, or let's say there is a police officer. Ideally, what should we call a police officer? We should call him in a gender neutral manner as the police officer. But in most of the scenarios, we are representing or calling the police officer as a policeman, which basically means that when we are uttering some of the words, we are not using the gender neutral paradigm is what is called as linguistic gender asymmetries. So when we are calling, we are making use of the masculine forms which are used to represent all human beings according to the traditional gender hierarchy, which means that according to this traditional sector, what we have is men placed over the women, and they hold a much better status, and this is continued to be perpetuated in the parliament as well as in the state assembly, says this article. So this article goes on to say that what we require is the gender fair language which aims at reducing gender stereotyping as well as the discrimination. So when we speak about gender neutral language, what we have to do is to avoid some of the words like the policeman. Instead of calling them policemen, what we have to use is gender neutral language like the police officer. So the article here takes into picture some of the examples. What are these examples? For instance, after 75 years of independence and Azadi Ki Amrit Mahotsav, Parliament often refers to women in leadership position as chairmen and party men. Women are also represented in the party. Women are also represented in the parliament. But why call them as chairmen and not chairwomen? First major concern. In the Rajya Sabha, the rules of the procedure continue to refer the Vice President of India as ex officio chairman, stemming from the lack of gender neutral language in the Constitution of India. Why are we calling the Vice President as chairman? Why not address it with the gender neutral language? Additionally, references to inherently masculine pronouns are made over 150 times in the former and 600 times in the latter, which basically means that we have number of laws in the country, and these laws are making use of some of the pronouns like he for the entire community. If we take the example in a compilation of ministerial replies to questions from 17th Lok Sabha, so far for 75 women parliamentarians, it was found that 84% of the answers that use salutations like sir, madam referred to women parliamentarians as sir. So what we have is these gender neutral language which should have been used is not being reflected in our daily verbal communication. We are making use of he instead of she. We should have made use of madam instead of sir. We have ample other examples as well where the presiding officer being the woman is also addressed as chairman madam in the Lok Sabha. So this basically reflects that the language which should have been gender neutral is unfortunately being used in a masculine form. This creates multiple concerns. What are the concerns? We have had India represented by a prime minister in the form of Indira Gandhi ji. We also had a president in the form of a woman. We also have number of women who are represented in the parliament as well. So when we have women in the parliament, the constitution or the laws and in fact all the bills and the legislations in the near future should have gender neutrality. If this is not gender neutral, if a particular language is not used, it means there is discrimination that we are perpetuating. This also perpetuates gender stereotypes as well. So when we say that there is chairman, when we say policeman, the policeman also means that there are women who are sacrificing their lives in the police department, but unfortunately you are addressing these women also as policemen and not as the police officer. So it is perpetuating discrimination, and in the near future it will have a negative influence in shaping the culture and the social attitudes, and unfortunately such language is perpetuating inequality and also perpetuating patriarchal mindset as well. We know for the fact that India to a larger extent has the patriarchal society. This is where the dominance of the men come into picture. But if we are using these words, continue to use these words, we are further ensuring that this patriarchal society continues for the future generation as well. In order to root out this particular problem, there have been measures which have been taken in the past. In 2014, under the leadership of then Speaker of Lok Sabha Meera Kumar, the rules of the procedure of the Lok Sabha were made entirely gender neutral. Since then, each of the Lok Sabha committee head has been referred to as chairperson in all the documents. This initiative is proof that amending legal documents to make them inclusive for all genders is an attainable goal if there is a bill. So when we are drafting laws, when we are coming up with legislations, if we have to come up with draft legislations, all these will have to have gender neutral language is what is this article speaking about. If we consider some of the international examples, internationally even mature democracies that legalized universal suffrage after India, such as Canada, Australia and United States, have taken concrete measures towards gender inclusive legislation as well well as communication. Canada's Department of Justice has guidelines for issuing gender neutral language in all forms of legislation and legal documentation. The Australian government has incorporated gender neutrality in its drafting style, and the UK's House of Commons has declared in 2007 that all laws would be drafted gender neutrally. In fact, when you go back to the year 1987, UNESCO in 1987 published the first edition of the Guide to Non-Sexist Language. This and the subsequent efforts of UNESCO have also concentrated on the use of gender neutral language with a view to promote inclusiveness and eliminate inequality between the binary genders as well. So all this clearly points out that the government will have to take up the initiative to bring massive changes in all the legislations. In fact, we can start off with the constitution as well. If the parliament and the government is able to enable it, then whatever is the future progress with respect to equality and gender parity, the same will be enhanced. They would be able to send right message to the people that it is not just about words. We are not just saying in terms of words. We are not perpetuating inequality, but the real meaning of constitutional equality is brought into picture in terms of gender parity. So what should they do? They should bring in gender neutral language, reinforce the belief that all genders are equal in the eyes of the law. So going forward, what should the government do? The parliament, the state legislature and the local authorities must ensure that all the languages of land is gender neutral, keeping in mind the non-binary genders as well. Added to it, we have to focus that whenever there is a law that is being drafted, this law should also have the gender neutral language. That is when the original idea of constitutional equality can be brought into picture, and all the male pronouns should be replaced with gender generics is what is this article all about. Only when we are able to bring these changes in terms of the representation and also in terms of gender neutral language, other issues with respect to women can also be sorted, says this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says EC wants people to run from one seat. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. We have one of the important sections of the Representations of the People's Act called as section 33 of 7. What does it speak about? It allows a candidate to contest any election, whether it is parliamentary or the state assembly or even the by-elections, from up to 2 constituencies. What do we mean by it? Let's say there is one of the persons, a political candidate contesting from one of the constituency. He is contesting from constituency A, and at the same time he is also contesting from a constituency B as well. So he's not just contesting from one seat, but he is contesting from 2 seats, which is what is represented in section 33 of 7. Up until 1996, we had a particular framework where any candidate would be able to contest in any number of constituencies. It can be 3, 4, whatsoever. But in 1996, a legislation were implemented where it clearly pointed out that a candidate would be able to contest only in 2 constituencies. Prior to 1996, he could have contested in more constituencies, but after 1996, this was restricted to 2 constituencies. If we take the example, we have the present Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who had contested from 2 constituencies. One is Vadodara, the other happens to be Varanasi. Indira Gandhi ji contested from 2 constituencies, Medak and Raebareli. N.T. Rama Rao, the actor turned politician and founder of Telugu Desam Party, contested in multiple seats as well. Prior to 1996, you could have contested in many seats. So he had contested from Gudivada, Hindupur and Nalgonda. He retained Hindupur and relinquished 2 other. Only after 1996, a person could have contested only from 2 constituencies. Prior to that, he could have contested with more, but as of now, the present situation is that a person can contest in 2 constituencies. This is where we have number of concerns that has been voiced by the Election Commission of India and also by the people in the past. What are these concerns? When we speak about this particular attribute, that a candidate would be able to contest from 2 constituencies, this creates multiple concerns. What are those? According to the government records, if you took into the statistics for conducting an election in a particular constituency, according to the 2009 statistics, the Election Commission of India would have spent at least 2 to 3 crore for one constituency. Now imagine a person is contesting from one constituency, he also contests from another constituency. So after, let's assume for a moment, he wins both the constituencies, but he cannot retain both the constituencies. He has to let go one constituency. So let's say he is represented one constituency A, he is also represented another constituency B. He wins from both the constituencies. He can retain either A or B. He cannot retain both the constituencies. In that particular case, the second one which he lets go, that particular constituency will also have another role of elections. So what we will have is the by-election in that particular constituency. So as I initially told you, according to the 2009 statistics, for a single constituency, it was about 2 to 3 crores that was being spent for the conduction of elections. This particular number has also increased to about 5 crore in 2014 elections, and in 2019 elections the number has increased further as well. So if by-elections are conducted for the second time because that person had to let go one of the constituency, it means the Election Commission of India, and in fact the state, is spending a lot of money. So is it not a loss on the public exchequer? By-elections cost more, and unlike general elections, they don't have economic advantage of scale, which means that this particular election, when it is happening for the second time, the state may have to spend more as well. So the cost for the by-election in the second place will be exorbitant, and this will be a major problem for the public exchequer. Apart from this, whenever you're voting for the first time, you would be very enthusiastic. You would go to the election booth, you would also vote for the political candidate, and you would want to wait for the results as well. But when it is happening for the second time in the very same constituency, you would not be happy about it, because you have to waste your time. You have to go to that particular place, which you may assume, or any other person may assume, that it is the wastage of time. Why should voters be compelled to vote twice in the same election for the same seat within a span of few days, is the second major concern. So for the first time, if a voter is voting, he would be very enthusiastic. The voter turnout may be comparatively more, but if it is the by-election, the voter turnout may be comparatively less, and when the by-elections happen, his viewpoint may not be represented in the democracy. So many voters even have to travel out of the state as well. They have to travel out of their districts as well as from their places. This ultimately means, because they have to go for the second time, they may not go out, and in this particular case, the voice of the voter is also not heard. This happens to be the second major discrepancy. The third is in reference to one of the sections. When you look into section 70 of the Representation of the People's Act, it says election to more than one seat in either house of parliament or in the house or either house of the legislature of a state. If a person is elected to more than one seat in either house of parliament or in the house or either house of the legislature of a state, then unless within the prescribed time he resigns all but one of the seats by writing under his hand addressed to the speaker or chairman, as the case may be, or to such other authority, all the seats may become vacant. So this clearly points out once again that section 70 bars candidates from representing two constituencies in the Lok Sabha or the state assembly. So what we have is a contradiction between section 33 of 7 as well as section 70. This means that if a candidate contests from two seats and won both the seats, he or she is legally mandated to vacate one of the seats in favor of the other. So what we have is a contradiction. So why continue with this law is the third major concern, which is why we have the Election Commission of India in the present situation, which has voiced its opinion against the contesting of elections in two constituencies. The EC was in favor of not allowing the politicians from contesting from multiple seats. In fact, it has also requested the central government to bring a massive change in the law as well for barring people from fighting elections from multiple constituencies in an election. If the government is not able to introduce this law, the Election Commission of India in the past has also come up with an alternative. What is this alternative? Let's say there is a candidate who has represented two constituencies. He is won from both the constituencies. He lets go one of the constituencies. So the constituency where he lets go, he has to shell out the money to continue the by-election. So the ECE clearly goes on to say that the candidate contesting from two seats should bear the cost of the by-election for that particular seat where he has decided to let go. So in the present situation, as per the latest update, the Election Commission of India has made a fresh push for amending law to bar people from contesting more than one seat, and it has said that there should be hefty fine that should be imposed on all these people who are fighting two constituency elections. This is what is the recommendation of the Election Commission. In the past, we also have the Law Commission of India, which has also supported the voice of the Election Commission. The Law Commission, which advises the government on all the complex legal issues, also make advisory recommendation. It has said whatever Election Commission has said is right, but it is not accepting that they should be fined. What they are clearly saying is that two constituency elections for a single person should not happen, but they have not supported this very idea of hefty penalty. In fact, we also have the Dinesh Goswami committee report as well, which was released in 1990, which had also included recommendations for restricting one contestant to one single seat. So what is the way forward? As of now, what we have is one candidate who is able to represent two constituencies. This should change. Just like we have one person, one vote, what we need to have going forward is one candidate, one constituency, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says China foils bid to designate LET deputy chief a terrorist. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. What are we speaking about? We are speaking about Abdul Rahman Maki. Who is he? He happens to be the deputy Amir or the chief and the head of the political affairs of Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is also called as Jamaat-ud-Dawa, which itself is a UN prescribed terrorist entity. He also served as the head of LET's foreign relation department. He is a member of Shura, that is the governing body, as well as a member of JUD's central and proselytizing team. He is the brother-in-law of LET chief Hafiz Syed, who is also the UN prescribed terrorist. What has been his role in the terrorist attacks in India? Maki has been involved in raising the funds, radicalizing and recruiting the youth for violence, and planning attacks in India, particularly in the Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. While Maki was holding leadership positions in LET, the LET has been responsible for and had involvement in prominent attacks in India, such as 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks, Red Fort attack on December 22nd, 2000, Rampur CRPF camp attack on January 1st, 2008, Karan Nagar attack on February 12-13 in 2018, Khanpura attack on May 30, 2018, Srinagar attack on June 14, 2018, and Guresh Bandipura attack on August 7, 2018. Since he was prominently involved in terrorist attacks in India, the Indian government has designated him as a terrorist under the domestic law. Added to it, you also have United States of America, which has also called him an US designated terrorist. We have the US Department of Treasury, which has also designated Maki as a specially designated global terrorist, and as a result of this designation given by United States of America to this particular person, all his property and interest with respect to these properties will be subject to United States of America's jurisdiction, and they are completely blocked. So US persons will not be able to have any transactions with him, and in case they do have transactions, they will be kept a close check and all the assets will be frozen in United States of America. Currently, India and United States of America had put a joint proposal to designate Maki as a global terrorist under 1267 ISIL and Al Qaeda Sanctions Committee of the United Nations Security Council. But we have China in the present situation, which has blocked this particular move. China, which happens to be an all-weather friend of Pakistan, has placed a technical hold on this particular proposal. Had it come into implementation, if this person was designated as a terrorist, he could not have accessed the funds, he could not have bought the weapons, he could have been imposed with travel restrictions as well. But because China has put a technical hold, all will not be enabled in the present situation. Is it the first time that China is doing this? No. China had blocked proposals to designate Maulana Masood Azhar, chief of Pakistan based UN prosecuted terrorist entity Jaish-e-Mohammed. So it is not the first time, but China has placed hurdles in the previous instances as well. What has been the reaction of India? India has said that this particular decision by China has been regrettable and extremely unfortunate. China says it wants to fight the menace of global terrorism, but when we have a terrorist who has killed many people, who is involved in terrorist attacks in multiple countries, when we are planning to designate him as a terrorist, China is not supporting. So this indirectly means that China, an all-weather friend of Pakistan, has been supporting Pakistan and indirectly also supporting terrorism is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says 5 million Indians affected by disaster, says the United Nations. This article here is speaking about Global Trends Report. What is this Global Trends Report? This happens to be a report which is released by the United Nations Refugee Agency, which happens to be United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. This report is published once a year and reflects upon the previous year's statistics. The report is usually based on statistics from the government data, from the data given by the non-governmental organizations, as well as from the UNHCR. What will this report have? This basically will have all the latest numbers with respect to the refugees, the asylum seekers, the internally displaced people, stateless people, people who do not have citizenship of any country world over, and all of these statistics will be collected and ultimately be presented. When we look into the global statistics at the end of 2021, as a result of persecution, conflict, violence, human rights violations, or events seriously disturbing the public order. If we look into the global statistics, we had 27.1 million refugees, 53.2 million internally displaced people, 4.6 million asylum seekers, and 4.4 million Venezuelans who were also displaced as well. So the annual global trends report by this particular agency has highlighted that more people have left their homes because of the violence, human rights abuses, food security, climate crisis, war in Ukraine. Now, if you look into the statistics from India, according to the United Nations Refugees Agency, close to 50 lakh Indians were displaced in 2021 due to climate change and natural disasters. This data, or the people who are displaced, is increasing every year. In 2020 in India, 38 lakh 56,000 people were displaced by environmental disasters. So if we consider the previous year, what we have seen is a spike to about 50 lakh Indians. The number of Indians displaced due to disasters in 2019 was about 27 lakhs. India will also have 4.5 crore climate refugees by the year 2050. So basically, because of the extreme weather conditions like floods, landslides, cyclones, droughts, forest fires, and many other disasters, what we have is more internal migration, says this article. So the UN agency has said that more people may flee in the near future, and what we require is all the governments coming together and establishing peacekeeping, because violence has been perpetuating more people to live a particular region, like what has happened in Ukraine in the present situation. So going forward, all the governments will have to come together and ensure there is peace and tranquility in that particular region, and they also have to fight the menace of climate change, because there are more environmental refugees within their own country who are moving from one part of the country to another part. If this is addressed, the displacement will reduce, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Language of the laws in India should be gender neutral. Examine. Next question. Candidates should not be allowed to contest elections from more than one constituency. Do you agree? Justify. Please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and do give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.